So, Acos, just before we click record, you said this episode is going to trigger me like mad. And that is the absolute aim of this. Because we chose to do this podcast based on, I wouldn't say a debate, but a conversation in your comments about insulin and fat loss. And we were both agreeing with each other. We're just coming from different angles. And I thought this would be really interesting to talk about. Where is evidence-based good? Where does that line stop? And where does experience come into this? So before we go into it, for people that don't know you and your, let's say, back catalogue of evidence, is like, tell us a little bit about who Acos is, because I think people see the coach, but they don't see the 20 years of university studies, courses. What makes you a good evidence-based coach?
Mate, where do we start? I think the first thing for people to know about me, that probably most people don't know, is I did my degree in information systems with business management at 18 years old. So I completely off tangent, nothing about fitness. I was into my training. I started at 15. I blagged my age to get to join a gym. Because at 15 I looked 25, mate, as you can see now. When I'm 40 and I look 60. So me and my mate blagged our age. We joined the gym at 15. We loved it, but it wasn't a career path for me at that stage. And completing a degree in that and then going into a brokerage, I literally hated my life. And I just said, like, I need to do something different. I absolutely love. At that stage, we didn't have YouTube. I am that old. We weren't watching YouTube videos. We didn't have podcasts to listen to. I really was fascinated by training. And then we had like 2 books to read to. And one was Arnie's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, which every bro absolutely has to have purchased at some point. Absolutely. And so then it was like, right, how can I get more information about like improving my physique, training, nutrition, all of that stuff that I value from a very young age. And I just bit the bullet and said, right, I'm going back to uni, which was not an easy decision. Obviously leaving a job, earning income, right, I'm going to do this. I was PTing at the time, so I'd done a PT course. That was my first sort of step into it. NASM through David Lloyd. They paid for all my qualifications, done my performance enhancement specialist, corrective exercise specialist. I did every course. I was a course junkie, In my early 20s, I was a course junkie. I went back to uni, done a BSc Sport and Exercise Science. And then probably about 6 years later, I went back again and done my MSc in Strength and Conditioning. And I've always been fascinated by, I'm a data guy. Okay, so I'm a data guy. I mean, when I coach, I want people's data so I can analyze. I want to know the person. I get that side of it, absolutely. But I need to see the data because the data doesn't lie, basically. That's how my brain works. And that's what has sort of got me to the point where now I just love evidence-based practice. And that's not saying that I don't take 20 years now of coaching people into my applications. Of course it does. Of course my experience with, thousands of people over the years now contributes to my, my decision making. But it's the research, it's the evidence and the data that will be applied into that individual, and then there's some nuanced changes that we will make. Okay. So I think where we are at the moment is like, I think we're on a surge of people loving the evidence-based stuff, but trying to practice evidence-based coaching without really being able to understand the evidence, which is where we're at. I don't know if you've sort of seen that the same, like coaches. I've seen loads coaches out there putting posts up with abstracts of studies, which I know they don't have access to the abstract to the study, the full study, because I've tried to get access and I can't access it. So they definitely can't access it. And they're putting an extract up and I'm like, yeah, okay, fair play. Yeah. You're trying to play the game, but you haven't done, the 8 years, 10 years of, work to understand what you're reading,
But I think almost that's the place to almost unpack it first before we go into the flaws of whether, where does evidence-based is a good thing or where does it kind of stop. You said something very interesting there about being a data guy and almost alluding to it being more important than getting to know the person. And I actually agree with you, because I think whether it's data from evidence or whether it's data from tracking things with your client, let's say weekly average body weight or how many meals out, their calories, their macros, their steps, their performance, it's easier to have the proper conversation and build a connection with the client when you're basing it off data. And I know this is a slight tangent, but I see coaches that come through SMU all the time where they go, I hate having difficult conversations, and they dread it. And they try and be like everybody's best mate, and they can't get results because they're trying to be everybody's best mate. And I always say to them, like, nothing will make a client dislike you more than them feeling like you've wasted their time and money. And what you'll see is that when you say, okay, if you use the data to have the difficult conversation, so instead of saying, oh, Steve, you've gone out on the piss again, man, what the fuck? You go, hey, Steve, thanks for your check-in. So we set this goal of losing 0.8 per week. We're at 0.2. And what I've noticed is that we don't track on the weekends, and our weight spikes up 2 kilos on Monday. Tell me a little about what happened on the weekend. This is, we take, not only are we basing off data, which means they can't argue with it and you get to the point, but also you take the emotion out the conversation by making it data driven. So I think having an appreciation for data actually makes you a better people person than learning everything about, and there's a balance, but learning everything about communication skills. Do you think your, more than 20 years of experience and studying this stuff actually has a knock-on effect on how well you communicate with your clients? Because I always see coaches, again, just last thing before I let you answer that, is that coaches often go into things like therapy. And I no knock on people like TMP or therapy. I fucking love them. But I see a lot of them go, my problem is my mindset, my motivation. Like, no, your problem is your lack of results and inability to track data to give you any certainty whatsoever in what you're doing. That's knocking your confidence.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely love that. Yeah, I think when it comes down to working with clients, so when I say data driven, I'm data driven, and I will use that first. I'll give you an example. A coach that maybe isn't as data driven as me, Bob comes in and says, I really want to lose weight, but I think it's my insulin that's my problem. I just, I can't manage my insulin. I just, I'm always, this and that. In that instance, the guy who's maybe not evidence driven will maybe play on that and go, okay, yeah, we can work on your insulin. We can try and work on this and that. And we can try and manage your insulin to make you lose fat, blah, blah. When I'm saying I'm data driven, I'm going to say myself, someone comes to me like Bob, I'm going to say, Bob, it's nothing to do with your insulin. Simple as that. Let's stop there. And I'm not going to sort of like go down that route. Even if there is, again, we can discuss and we can debate, and we'll be here till 10 o'clock at night, where how much insulin is a factor in this situation. I want Bob to get rid of that trigger, that emotional trigger that he thinks is just the reason why he's not getting there. And it really isn't the be all and end all of why he's not getting there, Because then when you start talking to Bob and he goes, right, yeah, so I eat this and I eat that and then I don't eat and then I do this. And then there's a million other reasons why Bob's not losing weight or not losing fat or not progressing with his training. It's not the reasons why he thought. So where I'm data driven, I'm going to say, right, Bob, the data on insulin, mate, is, when calories are equated, carbohydrate or ketogenic, whatever, blah, 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 blah. The result is the same as long as you maintain a calorie deficit. How about we try and focus on the calorie deficit? How about we try blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to entertain the insulin side. Okay, that's why I'm data driven. I'm not going to let, because someone has that thought process, deter my coaching experience with them. They've come to me because I'm the expert. Okay, when you get a plaster into your house, you don't come in and get the plaster in and go, I reckon I need you to start here and then maybe put some mesh here, and maybe if you use the plaster I've got, the guy's going to be like, mate, you've paid me to do a job, sit down, I'll do it, and then just look at the beautiful finish that you have at the end. Yeah, so I think coaches can get caught up in that relationship, right? Like they're just trying to talk through, and get the person, no, this is the process. This is what you've got to do. Now I've just got to make sure that you do it. And that's my job, basically.
I love that. And I think often because coaches that come into this, And I'll say the nice thing first before we shit on the industry probably later on in this episode. I think a lot of coaches come in with a lot of empathy, right? They really want to help people. And you often find that people that really want to help people get caught up in the client's story. And this is why, again, I think this is why coming back to data is so valuable. One of the things I really encourage, and this is something that some of my coaches do, and one of the things that some of the coaches don't do, and you can tell the ones that don't do it. And I go, most people get their check-ins at some point of the weekend and probably do their check-in responses somewhere at the start of the week, right? That's most people. So I go, right, on a Friday, last thing you do before you shut the laptop down for the weekend, if you are one of those people that have a weekend, unlike me, who just works all the fucking time. And I say, have a status check. Go through your client list and go, who is on track to targets, who is off track to targets, and looking at the data, why. So if I see Steve is off track and I see Steve has had 12 meals out, I know when the check-in comes in, my goal is to either find a better way of managing those meals out or get those meals out down. Then when he checks in on Sunday and goes, oh, well, my dog was sick, so I had to have a pizza. And then my wife told me we needed to have pasta on Thursday nights. And then all my friends peer pressured me into a drink. And then I got really sad about something I saw on television, so I had to have a takeout. You're not getting caught up in all the emotion and the excuses and trying to navigate them. You go, right, I know I need to get here. The destination hasn't changed. Now, based off the information, how do I navigate this? Whereas I see, I saw I had a coach recently had a sort of dispute between two clients, and he was worried that one of those clients would drop off, and he was like, "What shall I do, Simon?" I'm like, coach them. It's none of your fucking business what their personal relationships are like. Know your place. You're the coach, and I think sometimes because we want to help, we get so invested into people's lives, we actually forget, right, if we can't put the oxygen mask on us first, we can't help them. If we're burnt out to invest in their problems, we can't be the person on top of the building looking at them in the parade, navigating them through.
I love that. Absolutely. I think obviously there's a little bit about the fact that most personal trainers are just psychological experts and helping people just not completely fuck it on a weekly basis. And I think at that point, I think we need to say we're not robots. Like, we all eat a bit of shit and we have an emotional response. I'm not going to be like, stop being an emotional bitch, dude. Like, just like, I'm going to understand if his dog's died, there's going to be a bit of a leeway. I'm not going to be like, fuck the dog, dude. Just fucking eat.
How much protein do you reckon is in the dog? Was he a large dog? Because we can save money on food bills here.
Yeah, think about the savings, mate. Let's upgrade you to the platinum service.
I mean, is it a Chinese client? I mean, this could be dinner. Sorry. I know.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
I have a lot of people in Hong Kong that follow me.
Yeah, you gotta be careful, mate. We were talking about you getting cancelled. You've not been cancelled yet. Yeah, so I think there is an emotional response, but I think we can. I think we can get down to the point where we're coaching them emotionally than actually physiologically, and getting them to telling them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, and asking the hard questions and challenging them. And the thing is, I guess what differs with my coaching to others is the fact that I'm very, very not scared to lose a client if they feel that my approach is not for them. Absolutely. Why would I try and tailor how I would do things and my responses, how I feel work, and get results, for an individual that wants a slightly softer approach? Again, I don't think they would ever started coaching with me if they want a really soft, well, Vicky, how was your day on Saturday? Because we saw that you went over by 14,000 calories, and I'll be like, Vicky, what the fuck happened Saturday?
I would ask that not because I'm being nice about it, right? I would ask what happened Saturday to let them dig their own grave, because I want to know. Because if I said to them, and again, this is obviously different from the clients necessarily you get, but like I know that if I go, what happened Saturday, they'd feel so much like angst. They try and sugarcoat it as best as possible to alleviate some of that guilt and that shame. Where if I go, hey, John, we saw that you went up 2 kilos on Monday. Now that could be a bunch of things, but there isn't any tracking over the course of the weekend. Tell me what happened on the weekend. Really open question. Oh, I got up in the morning. I had a really good breakfast. I had some eggs for breakfast. Oh, that's fantastic. And what did you do after? Well, I made sure I got my work done for the day, and my mates went out took some mates to the cinema. Oh, great! What'd you see? Oh, Deadpool versus Wolverine. Take note, Marvel fan. And then I'm like, okay. And did you have lunch before? Did you eat there? I ate there. Oh, okay. And what'd you have? There was only pizza available. I'm like, okay, so what did you eat there?
I
And
love
a whole
that one.
Domino's pizza. And I'm like, right. And these it starts with really open questions, and as they start to drop themselves in it, like a shark that smells blood, the conversation gets more closed. And then I'll be like, all right, John. You're saying there was only pizza available. Which cinema park do you go to? Oh, I went to this one. I'm like, oh, Google. Oh, there's a Nando's there. There's a salad bar there. And they now know they can't have that excuse. I've just took them down the path. It's the same thing with, like, if I have a client that, let's say, for example, can't do steps, rather than giving them a strategy, because I think a lot of coaches, especially young coaches, like to mansplain, including the women, where they go, I know the solution, bang, do the solution. We don't even know what the problem is. Could you just do 10-minute walking breaks? And you don't know that client can never get up from their office chair. So I'll be like, hey, I noticed our steps are a little bit low. And I'll be like, what are we struggling with here? He goes, I just don't have the time. Okay. How much of the time at work do you spend answering emails? Oh, probably 2-3 hours. Okay. And do you have to be at your desk all day, or can you wander around the office? I can wander around the office. Okay. Do you have Gmail on your phone? Yeah, I have Gmail on my phone. Okay, fantastic. I want you to get up every 50 minutes, walk around the office answering the emails for 10, come back and do another 50 minutes work. They can't say no to that because I've got rid of all the excuses before I told them what I wanted them to do. I learned that from a coach of mine who went, he used to say at the end of the first session, how long have you got after each session? And the client in their head's going, oh, get me to do abs or arms or something like this. And they go, oh, probably like 20, 30 minutes. Fantastic. That's your cardio.
You fell in that one.
You see them face up, but they can't do anything. And they're in the gym so we can watch them. And I was like, that is brilliant, And I think that communication piece is really interesting. Like, and when to be soft and when to be hard. And not hard as in we're going to put the foot up your ass, but like hard as in I need to cut through stuff to make sure that you're not confused and lost. It's actually coming from a good place. If we take a very similar thing, like someone comes in and goes, I think insulin's the issue. This person is overwhelmed and confused. You need to cut through this to make it simple, because that complexity is probably the reason why he's overthought it and not taken action on anything. On the flip side, if you have a similar client that says that similar thing, great point, is, tell me about your dieting history. Well, a couple of years ago, I lost 10 kilos. I was super proud of myself, and I did like a low carb diet. And this is not the time for me to go, that was just water and glycogen, mate. You didn't lose any fat. And then all of a sudden you just shut on their achievements. And they're like, oh, fucking hell, maybe I'm not that good. What have you learned there? You've learned the client likes low carb dieting. So even if it's not the thing long term, you might go, okay, what made you drawn to low carb dieting? It could be an insulin thing. Or you go, okay, and why don't you do it now? What stopped you? Okay, we know they buy into low carb dieting. They like low carb dieting. So guess what? I'm probably going to go slightly low carb dieting. But I know there is a pitfall coming. So I know at some point I need to, as they get more buy-in with a client, wean them out of low carb dieting. Partly because I know they can't stick to it forever. And two, because I know the benefits of carbohydrates. Yeah. But what I haven't done is I haven't told them the only thing in their life that's helped them lose weight is a fucking stupid approach, and they shouldn't have done it in the first place.
See, again, mate, I'm completely different in terms of my approach. I think everyone's going to have their own coaching way. Yeah. And I think firstly, it would, like, when I do get a new client, which is like, like in terms of like, it's a lot. I work with a lot of people that I've worked with before, and like, some people that know their stuff. So let's say someone doesn't know their stuff. My questionnaire on nutrition is gonna ascertain what foods they like. So do you wake up hungry? Do you wake up and fancy like meat and whatever, vegetables, meat, whatever, or do you wake up and want a bowl of cereal? And I'll know whether they like carbs or not. Okay. Yeah. Now, in that situation, I think whoever was his name, Bob, let's say, who lost weight on low carb diets, is fixated on low carb because it was the one diet approach that he felt worked, rather than the low carb diet. The reason he's not doing it now is because he bloody loves carbs. He ate shitloads of fucking Skittles, and he remembered life was fucking awesome, and he's now not doing low carb. So it is like to understand, like, when they're saying stuff like, you're right, I really like low carb. you didn't like low carb, you like the results that you got low carb. Otherwise, if you like low carb, you'll be doing low carb. Okay, simple as that. I'll break down in that nutrition questionnaire, but dude, all your foods that you say you love, bread, pasta, pizza, like, you don't like low carb. Stop lying to yourself. I'm going to say it through now.
Our pizza is as good, because we both know that's bullshit.
I mean, it's just crazy. But I think the main thing is I can coach anyone that's coachable. Like if I'm having a debate from the first stage on like, no, because I remember a scenario where when I had my gym in Greenwich, a lovely lady came in for a consultation, and I sat down with her for about an hour and a half. Basically, long story short, could not get her to agree that she was overeating. She's like, I'm eating really healthy. I shop at farm foods, and then we're going through foods that she eats, and she's like, nuts and seeds all day long, avocados, organic avocados, brown rice, because brown rice is better than white rice. And, I was like, oh God, she's got a shitstorm coming. And, and in my softest way, I was trying to, coach her into the fact that I said, regardless of how healthy you're eating, it is your nutrition, and why you're not losing weight, it is your nutrition, because you're doing all this, you're doing all these steps, you're doing all these other things, but and I couldn't get her to get on board with the fact that her nutrition needed an intervention. It needed a big intervention. So at the end of the consultation, I said, look, I'm really sorry. I don't think we're the best match. I can, because I was the owner of the gym and we had another, 11 personal trainers working for us at the time, something like that. I said, look, I'm going to match you up with someone that's going to, work really well with your philosophy, blah, blah, blah. No, I don't want anyone else. I want to coach with you. I'm like, I've just tried to explain to you. It's so mad how the brain works, isn't it? I tried to explain to you that your nutrition approach needs an intervention. You do not agree with me. You come to me for my expertise. You've come to me because I get ridiculous results. You've seen the results. You've come to me. You want a consultation with me. You now want to debate with me the process of moving forwards. I say no, I can't do it. Let's set you up with someone that's, understands your approach. You may be a bit softer, maybe coach you into it over time. No, I don't want to coach with anyone else. I want to coach with you. How does that work?
That lines up with something, though, that I personally think is the most important skill a coach can ever learn, and that's expectation management. So that you have a destination. So I set the sat nav from Guildford, where I am right now, and I'm going to go to Glasgow, right? Now, at some point, we could change and say, I don't want to go to Glasgow, I want to go to Manchester, and that's fine. But for now, you want to go to Glasgow. Now, there are 7 routes we could get there. We could take the scenic route, or we could take the motorway, right? I don't care which route you take. But as long as you're aware that if you want to take the scenic route, it's going to take 14 hours rather than 5, right? If you're okay with that, I'm okay with that. But there's no miracle third option. One of the things I often coach the guys is like, there is something called the this or that question. So once you've gone through the big open question and finding out where they're messing up, it's like, right, we've seen that you want to lose X, we've lost Y. This is the reason. You could either do this or that. We could either take this much food, or we can increase expenditure this much. There's not a miracle third option. We could either take 28 weeks and lose 0.5% of your body weight per week, or we can take 12 weeks and lose 1%. There's not a miracle third option where you can have cheesecake 3 times a day and get in shape. As much as young coaches with the recipe guides on their fucking Instagram will tell you it's all about. But I see things like, now this is a slight tangent, but like when people go, all about food volume, I'm like, you've got 1 mushroom on a cheesecake. That's not volume, mate.
And you've blended it with water and ice to like expand the volume by. Because you've mentioned a couple. I was going to go through most of these at the end, but let's start with this and let's delve into the research and where it is. I think we've mentioned it a couple of times. I think it's the way we can then start to unpack. Does insulin lead to fat gain? Acos, your take? No, not when calories are equated. No.
I'm so glad you added the second part of that sentence.
There's always it's in context. That the actual answer is it depends, but that's the scientific evidence-based answer that doesn't get a result for anyone.
Well,
And
go on.
it depends. The it depends is like
Yeah.
the answer to everything. It's not a yes or no. It depends.
This is where I think evidence gets really this is where I think the biggest problem with, not the problem with evidence-based, but the people trying to claim mechanistic things, is that we end up with this tribalism thing of going, this person's wrong and stupid, which could easily be proven that's not the case. But it's not statistically significant, so we could also prove that the evidence-based guy is right. So and insulin causing fat gain is a brilliant example of this, right? Because I'm not explaining this because I know you know how this works, but for people listening to this that don't know how insulin works, like we increase glucose in the bloodstream for whatever reason. That could be down to we've had a really stressful day, or we could have eaten loads of sugar out the fucking back, right? Take your pick. There's a bunch of reasons, right? That now is going to be used for fight or flight response, whatever the stressor is. Someone comes in with a machine gun, we need to run or kick them in the dick. We'll mobilize some glucose. When that person's kicked in the dick or we've ran away, we go, okay, stress is averted. We need to take that glucose and put it some places, right? So we're going to place it muscles, replenish stuff, liver, and then we're going to stick some stuff into adipose cells, right? So technically, insulin does cause fat gain. It also causes muscle gain, hence why loads of bodybuilders take insulin. But let's ignore that for now, right? So technically it does. But I consider how you approach that information a little bit like creatine loading. You know, when people talk creatine loading, it's really just a way of selling more creatine to people. I could saturate my muscles with creatine by doing 4 to 5 days with 20 grams. Or I could take 2 weeks to do the same thing, having 5 grams a day. And over a year, it doesn't fucking matter which approach I really took, right? But one of them makes my wallet infinitely lighter, right?
Yeah.
I think the same thing here. Okay, I could take this information that insulin causes fat gain and that we need insulin to be low to lose fat and go, I need to do a keto diet. And that's what these zealots will say, right? Low carb insulin puts things in fat. So let's not have any insulin. So, okay, right? We go keto. And maybe we get insulin low within 4 or 5 days and we start tapping into mobilizing body fat. Quick. Cool. That's good if you don't like life. Or we could go into a calorie deficit and get to the same place eventually anyway, because no matter how high our carbohydrates are, we're in a deficit of energy. So we're burning more than we're using. So guess what's going to happen? We're going to get through everything we're using and insulin will be low. The actual thing is true, but the reason why in the research will often say it doesn't matter what diet happens is because if you're in a deficit, the same fucking thing will happen. It's people getting into a point, going too far and not being able to zoom out and go, actually, let's look at the bigger picture and go, oh yeah, they both do the same bloody thing. But if you like carbohydrates, because they're good for performance, they're good for thyroid health, they're good for enjoying life, right? They often can have food volume. Then they'll go, actually, probably a more balanced approach for most people is going to be the way forward.
I think the problem with the mechanisms of insulin is the problem why we have this discussion. Because obviously, anyone that's followed me and watched Chat Shit Tuesdays, there's some big players out there that will tell you that insulin is the mechanism for fat gain. It is a bit like, for me, saying that the Amazon delivery driver is the reason why you don't have any money in your account. Insulin's job is to put stuff somewhere. Okay, insulin's job is to you've put stuff in your gob. Insulin needs to put it somewhere. It can't just be floating around. It needs to put it somewhere. If all the places it can put it is full, it's got to store it as fat. But you still put put the stuff in your gob for the fact that insulin needs to do the job. So we're blaming the delivery driver for the reason you've bought 50 bloody items on Amazon and he's delivering every day and you've got no money in your account. It doesn't make sense. But however, if you break down the scientific mechanisms of insulin, it can sound like, insulin can cause fat gain because of its job. It's not the contributor, though. I mean, Jordan Syatt, whoever, if you don't follow Jordan Syatt, he's an evidence-based, no bullshit approach. He literally done empirical evidence on this on himself. He went into a calorie deficit, around 20% of calories, and he physically tried to spike his insulin with every fucking thing he ate in every day. He was sugary drinks, ice, like ice pops. His job was to show that if you maintain the calorie deficit, you don't put as much food in your gob, it doesn't matter how much insulin you produce, you will still lose fat. And he proved it. He proved it over, a decent amount of time, 14-week, 16-week process of literally spiking his insulin with every meal. He lost fat, a really significant amount of fat, because he maintained the calorie deficit. If you look at the evidence again with groups that go ketogenic or that go high carb, in certain systematic reviews and meta-analysis, the carbohydrate groups got slightly better results because they were more adherent. Simple as that. When you break down the evidence, it was adherence was higher, and we couldn't basically manage the adherence of people that were doing low carb or ketogenic because it was just harder to stick to. It's harder to stick to for most people. So looking at the evidence and then with empirical evidence of applying it to people and showing people that if you spike your insulin all day long, he was measuring your blood glucose, it was crazy millimoles per liter, like every day. It just doesn't affect fat loss. So how can we just look at the mechanism of insulin and say insulin causes fat gain? It's just stupid. It really is stupid for me.
Yeah, we're agreeing, right? I'm just sort of like, I'm taking their point and going, right, I understand where you're coming from, but this is why it doesn't match out. Because taking that example, right, I could actively spike my insulin, but I will still have a time of the day where insulin is low because I'm burning off more fuel than that insulin is allowing. So I'm always going to have a period. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a deficit of calories, because if you're in a deficit of calories, as a byproduct, insulin will also drop because you're not eating as much food to be a surplus of requirements. So technically it's true, but it doesn't mean that the only way to get the outcome is by taking away the sugar or taking away the stress, or not that those are bad things. And that adherence factor is really interesting too, because it's like, for the most part, I think people will find it somewhere in the middle. If you've got low carb and high carb, most people would adhere better to somewhere in the middle. But people also necessarily sometimes thinks that means I should start someone somewhere in the middle. And then we think, okay, what are all the factors that potentially affect somebody's adherence? Like I always find that a lot of things that when I'm studying stuff, I will go away that I've told. Like back when I first started, I was big pro Charles Poliquin guy. In some sense, I still am. Well, this is my point. I was like, everyone got steak and nuts for breakfast, and if you don't want it, shut the fuck up and do it. And you did low carb, and then for a while I was like, went against that. I'm like, no, we're not doing it anymore. It's too hard to adhere to. We're going to put people on loads of carbs. And then I've kind of gone full circle a little bit in the sense of my goal is, what's the diet you can stick to long term? Yes, it's probably going to be a little bit of a more balanced approach. And if someone came to me like you and went, Simon, I want you to help me lose fat, I ain't putting you low carb. Of course I'm not. One, because I get the impression from this conversation, it's not just the research. I get the impression you quite like a carbohydrate-based diet.
I mean, if there's sick people out there that don't like a carbohydrate, I don't think we're going to get on, basically.
Exactly. We're not in any benefit of putting you there. Also, right, I saw a reel of you repping out 3 plates on a bench press, right? I don't want to take carbohydrates away from you because you're a lump in the most positive way of saying a lump, right? But if I've got like Steve, who's never dieted before, who's super fucking stressed, me going, here's 3 macros, go, here's every food in the world, see you next week. I'm like, yes, my goal is to find moderate carbohydrates, but you sit in the chair all day, you're probably borderline insulin resistant anyway. Whether that's important, it's probably not hugely, but you're not moving, you're not training, you don't know what fucking dieting is. Even if this isn't important, it's a factor on top of all these things. Maybe starting a little bit lower carb with you, just because it's easier to switch the chips to a side salad than it is to go, what's that cooked in? And could you change that for me, please? It's like, right, hit a protein goal, eat a bunch of vegetables, go. Oh, that's really easy. I'll do that. Right, what are we going to do now? We're going to add some carbohydrates. So it's this thing is like, we get this very tribalistic nature in the fitness industry at the moment where people go, this is the right approach, this is the wrong approach, you're stupid, you're smart. And I'm like, we can learn shit from everybody. I see so many people knocking the carnivore diet and no one go, do you know what? No one paid attention to the nutrients in organ meat until the carnivore people came along. So rather than going, that's crap, that's crap, that's crap, go, well, that person has a personal experience with that's helped him. And there are people that will benefit from a carnivore approach, few and far between. But like you wouldn't say to somebody with a nut allergy, nuts are healthy. And while you're shoving them in the gut while they're having an anaphylactic shock. Some people are sensitive to shit we spray on our food. And we shouldn't go, I used to have eczema, psoriasis, depression, leaky gut, bloating, brain fog, and go, well, you're wrong because fiber's good. Randomized control trial. You know, it doesn't mean if you did some work on the gut and you managed stress response, you took out inflammatories, you couldn't add them back in later. But do they want to try this? It's like this is where the evidence meets the person. It's like, okay, this is the best approach on research, but it's probably too complicated for you right now. I just need to get you moving in the easiest way possible. But I've got half an eye that you're going to start loving training soon because I'm a good coach and you're going to be able to lift more load and train harder. Then some carbohydrates are probably going to be beneficial.
Yeah.
You know,
I think with that, I think the key difference where we're discussing this is the difference between low carb and no carb. I don't like extremist viewpoints.
Agree.
Extremist viewpoints of I'm going to go fully ketogenic or carnivore or whatever you want to call it, or I'm going to go fully, really low fat, really, really high carb, 10 grams of fat per day. My view is I don't like extremist viewpoints, and I would never coach extremists. I'm not trying to get everyone to have as much carbohydrate as possible. I'm trying to find the space in between all the extremist viewpoints. So low carb is absolutely fine. What you determine low carb is the question here, what can this person can actually physically manage on in terms of carbohydrate? Is it affecting their mood, their, the satiety, their energy, etc., etc.? How much are they dependent on carbohydrate intake for performance in their training, etc.? So many things. You've got to remember, I work with a lot of performance-based people. They're coming to me because they want to lose weight, but they also want to be strong-ass, powerful, fast, really good athletes. So I'm not working most of the time with someone like Bob, who just wants to lose a bit of weight, sits at a desk all day. So then this is where we talk about
calling the athletes. He needs a more powerful name, like Thor.
There's still general people there's still people that have a normal job and stuff like that, but they will still value their performance and they may have played high level sport or stuff like that. A lot of them, a big percentage of people that I coach is that sort of person. So then all these nuances change. It's not Bob sitting at a desk, he's 12 stone overweight, he eats McDonald's for lunch. Those sort of people, I'm probably not the best coach. Someone that's just come in and someone who can just get them to start valuing their health a little bit, that's the better coach. And that approach in terms of let's start with lower carb, they're not using any of these excess carbohydrates, blah blah blah, they're barely moving, they're not training, perfect. That's the approach that you would go with that individual. For me, I'm trying to find the space in between that's going to get optimal performance, increases in strength, power, all the stuff that people want to work with when they're coming to me, and I've trying to find that happy medium. I haven't been able to find someone, and with the data again, it drives my focus.
It drives your starting point as well, right? I saw a great podcast with Dr. Mike, the one that does all the the doctor reaction videos on YouTube. He did an interview with Dr. K, and Dr. K comes from a lot of Ayurvedic medicine, so a lot of Eastern medicine principles. But he's a Western medicine practitioner. He was trained in America, but he also appreciates a lot of the Eastern approach. And Dr. Mike is very Western randomized control trials things, and it's brilliant debate of when it boils down to it, the Western medicine approach is to take what research says works for the population and then bring that down to the individual. And Eastern medicine is who are you as an individual? And we'll scale that up to the population. Now, I think whether you fall to the left or the right of this, and I think we probably both fall into the let's look at the research, have that as the underpinning of where we start people because it's more likely to be right, and then see what wiggle room we have with that person in front of me. Either way, it's like you need to consider both. And one of the biggest problems I have with research, like the people that are purely evidence-based, not like yourself, who are evidence-based with 20 years experience to understand the nuance in the person, like 21-year-old coach who hasn't worked with anyone yet, kind of citing studies, is that what any study will tell you is it will show you the bell curve of the population. So we found that this worked with the 70% of people. So you start there because I'm not going to give you the 1%, right? You are probably the person that should have good amount of fiber, good amount of fruit and vegetables, good amount of carbohydrates, decent amount of fats, good amount of protein, right? But you might get the client that has this funny digestive thing every time they eat some veg and you go, God, we need to start looking at this. Or here's a better example. How many studies could you find that squats are the best exercise for quad growth? You could probably find a bunch of them. But then if you train Shaquille O'Neal, a 7'9" guy with big long femurs that are smaller than longer than most teenagers, it probably isn't. So it's like, for you to use the research properly, it's like, right, I know where to start, but I also have enough experience. I understand the mechanisms and how to personalize this to go, okay, that's our starting point. Let's personalize this to you. And I just don't think enough people have that. I think, and that's why I quite like the idea of people learning mechanisms to some degree first, because mechanisms allow you to go, right, in theory, how does shit work and where is the individual differences? And then when you read a study, you kind of understand the language because you've done your due diligence and time. And like, two, you don't get caught into Menno Henselman said this, so this is true. I'm like, stop. You don't know what you're talking about yet.
I love that. I think the interpretation of evidence is really important, absolutely really important. And I think, again, extremist viewpoints, like you say, someone reading a study, firstly, most people that aren't evidence-based will find research to confirm their bias. Okay, that's the biggest thing. There is research out there to prove anything. You will find it. Okay, if you have a thought process or a viewpoint, you can find one single specific study that found some sort of significant difference in that you can use as evidence to prove that this is the case. So, young coaches or no coaches that want to be evidence-based that haven't done time in the trenches to learn about evidence will confirm their biases with evidence and reading abstracts and not even really looking at the results, the analysis, the data. That's quite a scary position we're in, actually. We're citing evidence that gives us authority to talk about this subject, but we don't have the authority. Do you
think though that all we do with experience is lower our biases rather than completely take them away? Because this is why I think sometimes that we all should listen to people from a variety of different viewpoints and backgrounds. And obviously, we'll talk about in a second some of the signs that people don't know what they're talking about at all that you should disregard. But like, everyone has a degree of bias. The more research you consume, the more experience you have, the more people you see, you are less of them, and maybe you don't even trust your own biases. But here's a great example, right? I read a lot of research. I think I use most tools. I use diets from all different approaches. I am not dogmatic. But tell you what, I'm going to lean towards research that's going to be pro-meat than pro-vegan. And I'm going to spend more time looking at that stuff because that's what I'm into. And I no offense to any vegans, but you're a bit strange, aren't you? So like, the reason why I bring this up is because we'll have people that go, for example, I'm going to believe everything that Layne Norton says. And I don't think Layne Norton's a bad person to listen to. But you shouldn't only listen because he will still have his biases. And you should listen to who is the best person in the non-flexible dieting world that will give you his set of biases. And eventually you'll go, right, I've got more of a balanced approach. I know that was a long-winded way of answering a question. But...
it was a great thought process. I heard Layne Norton in a podcast say, don't turn your brain off, because there is people that he said he's got cult followings that people, anything they will literally apply anything he says. And he says to them, please don't turn your brain off. I'm one human being. Of course I have biases. Of course I You know, I have ways of looking at evidence that's going to, you know, bias my viewpoint. So you can never turn your brain off. And I think, again, when it comes to evidence-based, I love this conversation, by the way. Like, it will help so many people that are in the middle of, I want to be evidence-based, but I'm not really sure how to apply it. Like, you never should have a bias if you're really evidence-based. Okay. Your bias should be driven by the data and the outcome of the data, and where we are in a consensus statement, in a systematic review of the subject, etc. People a lot cleverer than me make my biases. It's not my biases. People a hell of a lot cleverer than me will help me make decisions on where I see the research. Okay. You should be looking at randomized control human studies. You should be looking at systematic reviews. You should be looking at meta-analyses. Meta-analyses, taking lots and lots and lots and lots of studies, breaking all the data down, collating the data together, and then, you know, analyzing that data once you've got, you know, a ton of data on a subject. Because and I don't remember the term, and Simon, if you can remember the term, please tell me. I think the term is Bayesian inference, which is basically meaning evidence can do a full circle. It can literally say, creatine is bad for you. No, creatine is amazing. No, we've found creatine is bad for you. Yeah, creatine is amazing again. And it can literally just, it can contradict itself over the time of evidence coming out. Okay. So we cannot at any point say this is absolutely true. Okay, we can't. You know, we there's no points that I cannot completely say insulin doesn't cause fat loss. I can't say that. But if someone asks me yes or no, I'm going to say no. But obviously, I can't say as an evidence-based guy that I have all the research and the evidence to prove that insulin doesn't cause fat loss. You know, so. Fat gain, sorry, whatever we were talking about. Yeah. So that is the key thing: interpretation of the data, understanding where we are with evidence, and a lot of the time, and most of the time, you read papers. Unfortunately, the conclusion is we just need more evidence. We can't make a definitive answer right now. We just need more evidence, you know, and like things like, you know, when we apply this, we know, you know, me and you, we're hypertrophy geeks, right? We agree with that, right? We're hypertrophy geeks. We have all this new research on lengthened positions, but it's only been proven on chest and lower body, okay? But we have this circle of people doing lengthened biased positions in the gym on everything, okay? We have 2 studies that link the triceps to lengthened positions and hypertrophy, but we have triple, if not quadruple, the amount of evidence on the other hand that shortened positions let the triceps grow better and cause more a potentiation effect for hypertrophy.
But this is a great conversation though, regards to taking the research as a guide and not as gospel, because there is going to be very much individual differences in like
huge amounts,
huge amount, for not only from like things like structure. But also let's look at the triceps, for example. The reason why we might find some research that says the shorter range position might work well is because a lot of people can't get a connection with their tricep in the length and range, or can't get the tricep in length and range because they struggle with getting into an overhead position.
You've just described me in both instances.
Great biceps, terrible triceps. But if you're going into a rope extension and you can get that connection, then you can progressively overload that and take it close to failure, which, like, again, length range parcels versus mechanical tension. Let's stop missing the forest through the trees here.
Yeah.
You know, but also then if we start thinking of things like length range partial stuff, kind of get into what's the structure of the individual. And there's Pat Davidson and Brett Contreras had a little bit of a Barney this week, right? Because Pat spoke about he doesn't think the hip thrust is a great exercise. Yeah. And Brett Contreras has put his whole identity and life onto the hip thrust, right? So he can't go back on it. So he's pushed himself into a biased corner that he can't escape from because he's become the hip thrust guy. And it's like, I think the conversation, is the hip thrust good or is the hip thrust bad? It's like, it's a pointless fucking conversation, because it's like, who are we talking about? So let's make the argument that length and range for the glutes is better. Let's make the argument that, right? Okay. So we're going to throw in some leg presses, some lunges, maybe some squat patterns, and we're going to overload that. That's cool. Okay. That's what we're going to be biased. Does that mean shorter range is pointless? No, because there's probably going to be some level of connection there. I also think training a muscle with the biggest range of motion you can own is going to be beneficial anyway.
That is literally, I agree with that. I just want to stop you there, mate. That's the best statement you've made. Like when we talk about this stuff, like what's wrong with the full range? Like what's happened to the full range? Why is it only length and range or short ranges? What's happened to the full range?
And I know it's not every one of them, but how many length and range partial studies are force reps at the end of like we do a full range leg curl and then they've done length and range partial and it's shown more growth.
Exactly.
Like, it's not the length and range partial, it's that you went closer to failure. You know. So we've got that consideration. Now, who have we got in front of us now? Because if somebody is a super stressed out shift worker, not getting any sleep, length and range are harder to recover from. So even if length and range is better, it's not better for that individual because he can't recover from it. So it becomes pointless. Let's do some short range work, make it easier to recover, work on the recovery stuff. That's better for hypertrophy for them. Now, if we break down the hip thrust even more, and I know I'm going on a monologue here, if we look at the moment arms difference, because again, this depends on how you do the hip thrust and how much friction, and there's all this nerdy shit we can talk about. If we look at the sacral argument, right, we've got the line of force from gravity and the points of contact from the feet and from the shoulders, right? So we've got ground reaction forces, gravity this way. We've got a little bit of friction pulling this way. So our line of force is like a resultant halfway through the middle. So we look at the moment arm to the hip and the knee on a hip thrust. It's probably about 50%-ish of the load will go to the glutes and 50% of it will go to the knee, right? So you go, but if you look at an incline hyper, let's say about 80% of that goes to the hip, right? So we can then go, incline hyper, better glute exercise than hip thrust. I'm like, for the most part, I agree with you. Now, if I had a beginner come in and go, I want to choose exercise to work my glutes, I'm going to do some form of leg pressy thing, lungey thing, squatty thing, depending on what they can do. I'm going to do some form of abduction to work those fibers. And I'm probably going to do an incline hyper. But at some point, you're going to get so strong that the weight you can lift on a hip thrust, because that exercise is more loadable, right, is going to be far superior to what you can hold on an incline hyper and actually complete the rep. So if I'm doing 50 kilos of an incline hyper and 80% is on the glutes, then that's better than your hip thrust. But when you get to a 200 kilo hip thrust and 50% of that is now on your glutes, that's 50 kilos more than the 50 kilo incline hyper. So now you're putting more on the glutes, but the trade-off is you also get more quads. So it's like, these are the levels of conversations that coaches should be having rather than blanket going, this study said X. Yes, this study said X in these people, and it's a great place to start, but now that's where the conversation starts. It's not where the conversation ends.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, I think, again, just on that as well is, where we're at is like your explanation of that was phenomenal. Who does that apply to though, Simon? That applies to an individual that has got to a 200 kilo hip thrust, or someone who's really, really advanced in their training that is looking for optimal. That is, so we've got this curve obviously of people when we train. So we start off, we can do anything, we grow, right? So and then we've got the law of diminishing returns over years of experience. Okay, so it's a curve that basically levels off over time with the years and years of experience of training. And we need to get more complex with the training. Understanding where you are on that curve is the most important thing when applying all this stuff. If a lady comes to me who wants to grow her glutes and is just at the moment doing squats and not doing anything else, anything I give her that's glute dominant is going to grow her glutes. Okay, I don't need to find optimal. There is no need to find optimal at this stage. Okay, you know, your himbine hydrochloride or your himbine can help increase, transportation of white adipose tissue to usable energy. If you're 30 kilos overweight, mate, you don't need your himbine, okay? You don't need your himbine. You're not on the curve. You're not 80% body fat. You're not struggling with the last little bit. Stop worrying about optimal. Stop worrying about
on that as well, right?
Formula.
If you look at the mechanistic side of this, right? People who are 30 kilos overweight will mobilize body fat really fucking well. Guess why? Because they're creating the stress hormones consistently, whether that's stress from I feel stressed or stressed because I'm 30 kilos overweight, I'm inflamed, there's a toxic component of mobilizing body fat, they're probably nutrient deficient, they're probably consuming tons of processed food. There's a lot of stress going on, right? We're really good at mobilizing that. We've got it to use and we're creating the environment to do that. What we suck at is oxidizing. So they need to be fitter, more metabolically flexible, need to be able to create a better aerobic base. Giving a 30 kilo person 30%, 45% body fat a fat burner, pretty useless. But if I'm 10% and I want to get to 6, now the problem is mobilization. We're already pretty healthy. So again, it's like we can find a study to say your him being is great, and we can find a study to say it's bad, and it's like, who are we talking about?
Yeah.
And that's
this is the thing. The coaches out there are talking about lengthen bias, and we're talking about don't do the hip thrust now, and we're talking about find lengthen positions, etc. And they're applying it to Audrey, who's got a year's worth of experience, who's got from the side you can't see her. There's absolutely no shape. Like, she can just start with the basics. You don't need to be talking about lengthen biases, and we don't need to be having this conversation until you really get to a point where you're talking about a competitor who wants that edge on the glutes, who wants that tiny bit extra. I love this research stuff. I absolutely love it. But the amount that I apply it to my group is so low. It's more for me. It's more for like, let me play about with lengthen positions on the triceps, and can I see, I'm going to measure my triceps. I'm going to see in the next 12 weeks if there's any change. Do I notice a difference? Do I feel, all these little things that I can apply and go, right, let's try it out. But I'm not putting lengthen tricep positions or lengthen bias glute positions or, really high heel positions in the leg press. The normal leg press is absolutely fine. Yeah. Just progressively overload that movement in a really good range of motion. You're absolutely fine. We haven't struggled with it for the last 30 years. We won't struggle with it for the next 30 years.
Yeah.
But, it is interesting how these debates are going on. I mean, has Brett Contreras helped women grow their glutes with a hip thrust? If anyone can say no to that, they haven't been watching his page.
100%. Again, it's because we end up in these debates where it's like you're not actually getting anything for the debate of yes versus no, because these aren't yes versus no conversations.
They're not. They're really not.
Reduction, right? And this is the thing. It's like, and this is a great actual segue from what you just said here, because actually one of the things I was saying is spot reduction possible. And I think there's a brilliant, what you said there about how much you actually apply stuff and when if it's relevant. Like, it might be, something might be true, but it's irrelevant. And spot reduction is a great example of this. People will go into the research and will say, spot reduction isn't possible, and that's a blanket statement. I'm like, okay, let's start here, right? Spot reduction is possible. It's just so fucking insignificant.
It's so pointless.
It's so small. I create a little bit of blood flow to my lower abs by doing some reverse crunches, right? Will I get a little bit more fat mobilization in that? Yes. Is it going to be all of a sudden that I'm going to get leaner abs and nowhere else? Fuck no. Do I still need a calorie deficit? Yes. Do I need still need depletion? Yes. So, like, we can read, and I've got them here, right? We can read Lyle McDonald's work, which I recommend every coach read, and go like, look, there is an argument. If you're that 10% person trying to get to 8, right? Yeah. Things like doing a little bit of ab work followed by some steady state cardio to oxidize that might give you a little bit of a bonus when those little bits of bonuses are actually important because you're doing everything else. And I still don't think it will give you much, but by that point, you want to dial in, cross all the T's and dot all the I's. It's like fasted cardio. Could fasted cardio help you mobilize a little bit more body fat and oxidize it a bit better? Maybe. Is it relevant for Steve, who's 40 kilos overweight? Do it when you damn well please. But like,
do you know what?
If I'm a bodybuilder, do you know what? If I could do cardio whenever I damn well want, maybe I will lean towards the morning because that 1% might be worth it to me. But it's not for the most part.
No. Firstly, it's going to be placebo because if you believe something, you might just put a bit more effort into it.
Huge point.
But it comes when you're coaching people and you're talking about this stuff. It comes to the point where, do you know that, like the memes? They're like, so you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah.
So you're saying there's a chance? If you give them the little bit of hope that there's spot reduction is possible, but we bracket it with it's so negligible, it's not worth your effort, blah blah blah. They're still in their head. That little guy in their head is going, but you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that little seed planted in their brain will grow, and it will dictate a lot of their decision making. As soon as you think spot reduction is possible, you do shitloads and shitloads and shitloads of abs because you're like, yeah, but I'm getting that 1% that no one else is
walking around
doing.
Like this.
Yeah, but because they're doing all that 1% of abs, they're not doing their cardio, they're not sticking to their deficit, and they've gone straight to the 1% because that seed has grown, because we've said it is possible. So I don't say it's possible. I'm like, don't even talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. Move on. Next subject. Let's focus here. Let's focus that. Are you doing this with a perfect level of execution? Right. Don't worry about it then, because you're nowhere near needing it.
But
I wanted.
Go on.
I have to bring this up because I need to ask you, because you brought up Lars McDonald's book and the stubborn. Did you show me the stubborn fat loss solution or the rapid fat loss?
I've got them all.
Right. So the stubborn Simon question: did you ever do?
I don't have the stubborn body fat solution, but I have read it.
Right. The stubborn fat solution. If you've read it, and I have to put in my hands up to saying that I've done that, has a ridiculous protocol to get to the point of the white adipose tissue being transported.
If I remember correctly, it's years ago. We're talking high intensity interval training, then it was steady state, and then back to more high intensity. Was I right?
You got it, mate. You got it. And I did this. I swear to God, I did this. So firstly, bracket it with caffeine, L-tyrosine, yohimbine, L-theanine. Okay, you have to take caffeine, L-tyrosine, yohimbine, L-theanine. You have to take all of that, and then you have to wait half an hour. You cannot start your cardio. So take that, wait half an hour, make sure all of those, all the good stuff is getting circulated. You do 5 minutes of ridiculously high, 90% max, 95% max, high intensity intervals, like 20 on, 10 seconds off, some sort of Tabata style. You get off and you sit on the sofa. You cannot, you're not allowed to move. But this is the protocol. It was hilarious. You get off, you sit on the sofa for 5 minutes, you don't move. You get back on your bits of cardio, whatever you're using. Bike was quite easy to use for it. You do 40 minutes or up to an hour of low intensity steady state. You then have another break, and then you go to moderate state. I'm like, what a ridiculous protocol. And I actually did it, mate. I had to do it because I just had to be like, let's have a go at this. Like, what an absolute ridiculous. Like, when we're talking about extremism and like trying to get that 1%, I was probably 15% body fat doing this shit. Like, I did not need to do this.
Like the Ultimate Diet 2.0, right? I did that, right? And does Lars McDonald's Ultimate Diet 2.0 work? Of course it does. And it's quite an extreme calorie deficit with big refeeds. Essentially what it is, for people that don't know. Protein spare, multi fat during the week, big old refeeds. Now, is there an argument that would work for somebody? Yes, if someone's really busy during the week and they barely think about food and they like the weekends, that's a tool in the toolbox. But here's the thing I found with it, and again, this is where personal experience comes in. You feel like you have a hangover every Monday because the amount of carbohydrates you had after not having any for a week. I just didn't feel worth it to me. And this is the thing, like, I don't mind. You talked about, like, you don't like being extremist. And I think my take on this is that I don't mind extreme protocols. What I don't like is zealots. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't mind a ketogenic diet. I don't want to get rid of tools in my toolbox because they might be, and might only be for the 2% of my people I ever work with. But I don't want to go, that will never be useful. Right? I've had people that have come into me with various autoimmune conditions where I've lent on a carnivore-based approach as a starting point. The problem I have with these things is zealots, where it's not about the extreme approach. It's about the fact that that's the only approach. So it's the people that go, I'm going to go a low-carb diet, and then I'm going to do a low-carb diet for 10 years. That's the problem. It's the same thing with coaches that they've heard online that anyone being below 1,600 calories is bad. Why does that make that too low? And it goes, and I've never got a good answer. But I'll go, why is 600 too low? Because that person told me. Okay. And do you have any understanding of the signs and symptoms that someone's thyroid or testosterone up in the gutter? No. Okay. So I know guys that can, including myself, that have been on diets of 11 to 1,300 calories for short periods of time prior to a photo shoot and been fine. And I've known people that fall to bits when they go below 3,000. So there's such an individual nature to this. And it's the problem isn't the aggressive dieting. All of us, if our clients overeat and have a pizza one day, all of us go, it's okay. It doesn't matter that you've gone over. One day of high calories won't do anything. If we zoom out over the year, it doesn't matter anyway. But when that same coach has a client go under for a day, careful, your thyroid's going to explode. I'm like, no fucking way. It's the problem is, if I push you really fucking hard for a 4 to 6 week period of time, you're not going to explode. You're not made of glass. You're not fragile. But I am smart enough to know, okay, I've seen the signs I need to pull you out of this. And this isn't where we're going to stay for a year. We're going to periodize our nutrition like we would periodize our training. And there's some balance to this. I see a lot of coaches don't get the results they want because they're too scared that a client's going to develop, and again, this is a touchy subject, will develop an eating disorder or disordered eating. Now, things with the eating disorder thing. One, people have genuine diagnosed eating disorders is normally not about your dietary approach with them. It's a thing that's come from childhood, from the media, from their parents. Disordered eating, still very important. We don't want to encourage disordered eating with anyone, absolutely. But there's about 2.5 billion people in this world that are overweight and about 7 million that have got eating disorders. Like, most people eat too many crisps. They aren't scared of crisps. And if you have signs of this, you, of course, should be careful with it. But you have people that are open to sign up to London Marathon because they want to push hard. And then they come and go, I want to get lean. And you go, no, you don't. That's too dangerous. I'm going to tell you, I like the plasterer, right? I'm going to tell you, this is what your goal should be. And I'm just like, we need an ounce of perspective here. People aren't going to burst in the flames if you push them for a short period of time. Just don't push them forever.
Yeah, I love that. I think I picked up on the whole disordered eating thing. A question for you.
Okay.
Do you not feel like everyone has a level of disordered eating? Like, have you ever met anyone that's like fully in tune with their eating? Like,
and do you know what for that? Us. When I say us, I don't mean us specifically. I mean coaches. And I think a lot of coaches are projecting their disordered eating onto their audience. And here's my thing. Do I think yo-yo dieting is good? Absolutely not. Right?
No.
And do I think yo-yo dieting can have downstream effects on somebody's health and metabolism? Not in the timeframes that people like to think. Like, metabolic downregulation.
Over decades.
If yo-yo dieted for 20 years, you better fucking believe that your metabolic rate is going to be slower because, well, you're going to have less muscle for a start. But like the problem I find is, as coaches, we project our emotional issues with food onto people. If clients have yo-yo dieted and they've come to you still having like 3 pizzas a week and having a curry and a beer with the boys, that is the opposite of disordered eating. If I said someone that's came to me, I did a low carb diet once and I've never deviated from it because I'm so scared of putting on a pound, then I'm like, okay, we need to tread carefully here. But if you said to me you did a diet and then you just went back to your diet before, I would consider that a relatively normal way of eating. You clearly aren't scared of a deficit and you clearly aren't scared of a surplus. You are human.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, they're in the right middle ground, which is absolutely fine. I think eating disorders, medically eating disorders are very different from when we're talking disordered eating. It's like a viewpoint, maybe like, how many coaches will probably go for a binge and restrict cycle because they've led themselves to believe they're not allowed to eat these, these foods. And, coaches could be some of the worst people. I've heard people speak to me and listen to conversations that we've had. I've had a conversation with another personal trainer about our favorite biscuit, and if anyone doesn't say Jammy Dodger, they're crazy. But anyway,
I would not say Jammy Dodger at all.
Jammy Dodger is the best biscuit. But let's not go too far in the tangent. Custard cream. Oh, very close second. Yeah, you got my second, mate. I like it. But I remember another PT when we were having this discussion, eavesdropping and he ripped guy, really, really good shape. And he was like, what are you guys like? How can you be talking about biscuits? Like, you know, like, all right, how can you be even thinking about eating a biscuit? And I was like, this guy is in such a bad place with his food, and he has such a misrepresentation of what can be and can't be eaten. And if he had a biscuit, because the guy's gonna have a biscuit at some point, he's gonna feel so bad about himself for eating it, feel guilty, probably, be so strict for 2 weeks and be beating himself up because of that biscuit. That's a high level of disordered eating that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
The really strict approach to, rather than okay, disordered eating because I emotionally eat. And like, who doesn't emotionally eat? I mean, I'd love to meet a person that doesn't have a reaction to food when their emotions are skew with. Like it's. If you've got that down, you're ahead of most of the people out there.
I had a coach. I had a client, sorry, an old client of mine, and she has a history of eating disorders. So we had to tread very, very carefully, and we got her in unreal shape to the point. When if you ever watch the YouTube video of Mike Israel talking about like body fat levels, and he brings up the UP charts of like what this percent looks like, and this percent looks like, and this percent looks like. If you ever watch the video, the leanest female on that chart is my client.
No way. How cool is that?
Video, and I'm like, yes.
That's so cool.
I think when I first found it, I put it on the Supercharged group, and I was like, guys, I made it in life. Like, and I'm not even legally allowed to let people know it was me. But like the two things I brought up with this client, because I caught up with her recently, because she was back in the UK, and she's had a PT in Dubai for a little while that she sent her like her food pictures and went, I didn't tell you to have carrots. And I'm like, wow. At what part here? Like, no one goes, oh, I lost 20 kilos and then I had a carrot and I gained 50. The level of absurdity there. And the other thing I think it's a valuable thing to learn from her is that often I think the people's approach to dealing with and again, I'm not saying that it's not, I'm saying that it depends, is that a lot of people have even a sense that someone has a bit of a struggling relation with food. Our immediate reaction is to pull back all responsibility. So you don't need to track anything. Don't need to track your food. Don't need to track your weight. You don't need any structure. You don't need to do the steps. And we sometimes forget that probably the reason why they've gone into this. For some people, it's too much control and we need to pull that back. For other people, it's the lack of results that's made them neurotic about not knowing and overwhelmed on what to do. So for every person I would move away from the scale and be like, let's focus on other things. And that's a genuine approach. I'm not saying it isn't for anybody, but there is another person that's had a troublesome relationship with food and their weight, where taking their weight more often is the answer, because they go, look, where you took your weight weekly and then it went up and you freaked out and panicked? Just that we're taking this daily now, and you went up yesterday and then you went down today, and it's time of the month, and so you went up, and 4 weeks ago you did the same, and 8 weeks ago you did the same, and 12 weeks ago you did the same, and hey, you ate 11 o'clock last night, it was a big old fucking salty meal. Look what's happened. And all of a sudden you go, oh, it's like saying budgeting gives you a bad relationship with money. Because it's like, don't be wrong. If you over budget, could it freak you out, make you go insane? Sure.
Yeah.
But for every person that's the case, you have another person that goes, oh my God, I can't believe how much I was spending on Starbucks. And then next year they save loads of money and buy a house.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that loads of time with eating disorders. And we're talking like, again, medically diagnosed eating disorders. And, coaches thinking they can help people like that. Again, I used to manage coaches for Virgin Active. So I was regional manager for Virgin Active back in the day. So you'd have contact and communication to, let's say, about 70 to 90 personal trainers. And they would all obviously come to you with, there's this case, there's that case. And it is so, that is a discussion that is so hard to pretend what you're talking about, and like that
should be one with a doctor in present, at least
absolutely
work with, if not. I don't like the term refer out, because sometimes refer out suggests that because that's why coaches don't refer out enough, because they're worried that means they lose business. If you go refer to, you actually become more the expert when you go, look, That's not my expertise. I have a doctor. Go and see them, and I will communicate with them to make sure that you are safe. You don't lose business, and your client goes, oh, I respect you for doing that. You become more of the expert by knowing your place.
Yeah. And I think at the beginning, it's always just to make sure that they're clear on what your scope is and what you're qualified to do. Yeah. And, you know, pretending that we can solve everyone's problems because we know the mechanics of dieting and training is crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many approaches to that situation, isn't there? And there isn't a definitive answer, like you said before, where like you can take 17 roads and they can all lead to the right direction. And you need to find the right road for that individual that helps. But it is I've worked with it a lot. And like you said, you know, you've got an individual that tracks absolutely everything, and you know, maybe is a bit of extreme there, maybe underweight, and you know, whatever. And you say, right, look, we need to get them we need to get them healthy again. We need to, you know, we need to get them away from tracking everything. We need to stop them from, you know, worrying about everything they eat. But the trigger that led to their led to their extremism was one situation where they were overweight and a person said this about them, you know, in front of a class, let's say at school. You know, I had a situation when I was young when the teacher called me fat. Do you know how much that scarred me?
Yeah.
You know, the teacher, my maths teacher, called me fat, and imagine how much. And it was only a joke, you know. It was a really, but the whole class laughed, and it was a split second for the teacher that scarred me for maybe 10 years. You know, I'm like, you know, and it's, you understand that the situations and the triggers that cause them to get to that situation is being overweight or whatever, and then you say, right, okay, you know, look, we're gonna stop worrying about our food, but have a better, healthy relationship with our food. You're going to eat these foods. We're not going to worry about it. They start gaining weight, and you're pushing them towards that trigger that caused them to start the aggressive, you know, so you're not fixing anything. There's so many things about that you could just, that's another podcast, I reckon, mate.
It's a really valuable point, right? Because it's like, I think a lot of coaches talk about, they almost over-exaggerate their power in creating or reducing the symptoms of disordered eating. They go, low-carb dieting is the cause of it. I'm like, don't wrong, it could be a factor, but it's a factor in front of so many things that are so far beyond your scope. I think it's best that, not saying that we don't touch them, but we certainly shouldn't encourage more of them, but like to base what tools we should or shouldn't use, or what we judge other coaches for doing. You know, it's like when I see coaches judge other coaches for their calories were too low. It's like, well, one, you don't know how that client was recovering. You don't know how much that client was moving. And if I gave you 1,100 calories on paper, I've had clients that generally, they've had 1,100 calories on paper because I know in reality it's 2,100, right? You did a post about this recently about people over-reporting 1,000 calories a day, right?
Yeah.
I had this coach, I went through my whole decision-making process, and I knew he was lying to me. I knew he had this guilt. But again, eventually, I need to work with him until he's open enough to have that conversation with me. Why he has that guilt around food, I don't know, right? And I just knew because every one of his tracking numbers was super round numbers, like 75 every day, right? He didn't track on MyFitnessPal, but he promised me that he absolutely stuck to the meal plan to the letter. When he sent me, he's working shift work, he's working 3 jobs. And when he sends me training videos, his single arm rows look like he's powering up a lawnmower more than they look like a controlled single arm row. So am I in my head going, your nutrition is the only area of control you have in your life? I call bullshit. So I know that if I give him 1,100, he hits 2,100. If I give him 2,100, he hits 3,100. So I need to be lower than what really is, because I know if I reduce his food, he's going to reduce the olive oil. He ain't going to reduce the cookies he's not telling me about. Is that optimal? No, but the calories still come down either way, and it's the only option I've got until I have time to...
I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. That is literally the approach that I would take at the same time, because the conversation of, are you telling me everything? Are you putting everything? Are you tracking accurately? You're not going to get anywhere with it. You could literally just be banging your head against a brick wall and saying the same thing, and they're doing the same thing because they're at a position that they're not comfortable telling you what they're actually eating, and they're not comfortable going there, you know. So absolutely the best way to move them forwards is to basically, you know, not tell them what you're doing and do it. Which I love.
I want to go into one like main topic before I ask you a couple of closing questions. And I choosing this topic up the list I had because you mentioned about with creatine, for example, research doing a full circle. And I think the things that I had, the issues that I think people need to be aware of with research, we've spoken about it being a bell curve and the fact that, yes, okay, it guides you what works with most people, but it doesn't mean it works with the individual. I mentioned that they are often behind, which you alluded to with this creatine study, like blood pressure research, right? We're now looking at 120/80 as stage 1 hypertension, right?
Yeah.
But we considered that healthy blood pressure for a long time. And it's not massive. I wouldn't worry if I had 120/80, but the recommendations are moving downwards. And that's been relatively known through early research for probably about 20 years. Muscle nerds, for example, were teaching it about 10, 15 years ago. But the research was behind because for something to become a consensus, we need a fuck ton of research, right? So you could be giving bad advice because they are being thorough, as they should be, right? So, that's another factor here. The other thing I always think is big on this sort of stuff, and I'll maybe get your take on this before I go into the topic I was going to say, is that studies done well are testing the effect of one variable on one specific outcome. If you don't do that, it's a pretty bad study because you're not really testing for anything then, right? There's too many confounding things. But the problem with that is when it comes to certain topics where you go, let's say someone says a certain toxin, we can find research suggests that this toxin isn't bad for human health when consuming whatever else. But when we look at, if you say that toxins or toxic load doesn't have any impact on people's health, that's a relatively stupid statement. We know this is, right? And whether it's people having tons of mercury fillings, it's the reason why we don't do mercury fillings anymore, and I've seen the thing, or the impact of mold. What a study won't show is the accumulation of this toxin plus the mold in your house, plus the city, plus the factory, plus the plastics. And so we need to kind of go, right, let's zoom out a little bit here. So we know that reducing toxic load will have a positive impact on somebody's health, but we go so much so that we actually get people to change all their face creams and never look at plastic again, and that the stress of changing that in their life is actually worse than what they were doing previously. There is a middle ground of what people are willing to do. But that's my things with research, is like you often get very myopic where you ignore things that can be an important factor, or you go so far the other way going, research doesn't know anything, and all of a sudden you're blaming all the toxins in your food for killing you. And Absolutely. I think that's the argument we have here. We have people who are so blind to the research, they ignore things that are important for health. And we have people that are so disenfranchised with research that they become scaremongering people. Yeah. And that's the problem I see on both sides.
Absolutely. I think going back to what you mentioned there in terms of like, yes, we're taking one substance or one evidence, and we're looking at the evidence of that subset. We have to do that. We have to put as many controls in as possible. Okay. For anyone that doesn't do research or doesn't look at the research, controls are probably the most important thing to dictate an outcome of a specific thing that you're testing. Because if you don't control everything that could affect the outcome, you don't know fully that it was that caused that outcome. Okay, so we have to look at it. We have to control all the controllables. That's why we have groups of people that don't do nothing, a control group, and they just do the 12-week study or whatever, and they do, So that is a massive, massive part of the study. So now we're talking about when we're getting evidence of one specific mechanism. Now we need to know how to apply that evidence. And then that's what you're talking about. You're talking about evidence application. Okay, you're talking about application. How does this apply to my scenario of this person or that person or me? How can I apply this evidence that I've got, looking at all the other evidence, really making a good, review of the evidence and going, right, how does that apply with my approach? Again, nine times out of 10, it won't apply. Okay, it's just a thought process. It's just an understanding. It's just an element that you may need to just put in your approach that will change one tiny thing. You're not going for massive deviations like with the creatine. You're not going, right, stop everyone from having creatine. Now everyone's back on creatine. No, you know, it's just that's such a silly way of looking at the evidence, you know, and that's what a lot of people are doing, and they don't understand. I think someone can understand the research and they can go, right, okay, this is what they found. They read a conclusion, they looked at the results of the study. Then they just don't know how to apply the information that they've got. Okay, and that is the key thing. You know, people that are going on Mental Hensman's page, reading an Instagram screenshot of normally a published ahead of research, published ahead of print study. So he doesn't, I mean, he's going to have access to all the studies, but like, it's not even published yet. You know, it's published ahead of print, so he's going to get access, but we're not going to get access. So the amount of times I can't see the studies that he's put up because they're still abstracts and not been published in their next volume of the journal. You know, making a decision completely on that is insane. That's just literally that. If you have been an individual that has looked at a bit of research and gone, I am now going to do that every day for the rest of my life, you're crazy. You're literally crazy. That is literally the worst application of science, you know.
It comes back to your thing at the start, right? Of being like having a data-driven approach. So if I use the example that I used there about toxic load, right?
Yeah.
So there'll be questions in my intake form, which will be like, I'll look at the photos of the individual and just look at where they're at. I'll look at health conditions. If they say to me, if they're morbidly obese, big old big, or I think if I punch you in the stomach, it'll hurt my hand more than your stomach. It's so solid. I look at your diet, it's completely full of processed food, right? You say to me, I've got a few digestive issues, I've got leaky gut, I've got an autoimmune condition. If I then look at the questions like, do you have any mercury fillings? Yeah, I had a bunch of fillings as a kid, like 30 years ago. All right, how much food do you eat from tins? I live off tinned tuna and baked beans. That's the only thing I eat. And I'm going, okay, I'm now going to start looking. How much do you drink a week? Tons. Oh, okay. So the liver's going to get a bit of a battering. And there's a bunch of toxins here already. I'm going to start looking at this stuff, and maybe a little bit sooner in my thought process. I get coach, 12% body fat, right? Super fucking healthy, runs marathons every single week, right? Has never looked at processed food. Like, eat your tin tuna out of a plastic.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't really care. It's like the seed oil debate. People go, seed oils are good. There's research saying that seed oils are good. And then people go, here's research saying seed oils are bad. I'm like, it's not a question whether seed oils are good or bad. It's the dosage. We, in the Western world, 25 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3, when it should be around about 2 to 4 parts. So if someone says to me, if I get a coach signs up with me who's pretty healthy and goes, shall I worry about linoleic acid? Fuck no. You know, if I've got someone that's never eaten fish in my whole entire life and they are super stressed and they only eat like packet sandwiches, you know what? Maybe supplement some omega-3s and maybe back off the seed oils a little bit for the next 4 weeks and just get you back to a healthy range. Then I don't care anymore. But like it's this good, bad tribalism bollocks. And like it's not about whether they're good. I say to people that talk about seed oils being bad or pro-inflammatory fats being bad, I went, nothing ruins a fat loss result quicker than you cutting your finger and bleeding out and dying because you can't create a clot. Inflammation's pretty important, but it's people have lost context.
That context is the exact term, I think. And again, it's like it's applying to the result that they're asking for. You know, are we talking about fat loss? Can seed oils, you know, be affected? No, not really. Are we talking about health? Are we talking about how much it can impact LDL and HDL and the ratio and all of those things? Yes, possibly in the right context. Where are you getting your seed oils from? What temperature are they? You know, all of this stuff that, you know. And it's so, you know, it is, unfortunately, people just want a definitive. And, you know, when they ask you or they ask me, they are going to say, Simon, are seed oils good or bad? Yes or no? And we're going to always say it depends. It's the shitty answer and you don't want to hear it, but it's because it's the truth. The context, the application, I need to know a million things to make that decision. I can't just say how long is a piece of string? It's this long. It's just impossible. So, I think like even with the insulin stuff, it's like, yes, I will be the no guy, but, you know, it just depends. Like you say, two extreme scenarios, it will massively be affected. It will be a cause for concern. The other scenario, absolutely not even thinking about it. So yeah,
And
it is like,
as you said with the insulin thing, it can both be true and pointless.
yeah, absolutely.
It can end either way. So who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
So the last topic I had before my closing question, because this is the one I was talking about when I talk about full circle with creatine, is training volume. Training volume recommendations for hypertrophy. As you said, we're both hypertrophy nerds. I think it's a great example of how people blindly following the research can leave you stuck. Because it seems the last couple of years, there seems to be like a big 180, right? We had this thing where every bit of research from particularly anything that Israel was saying, anything that Brad Schoenfeld was saying was more.
You're going to say, bring up Brad Schoenfeld. Yeah, Brad.
Everything is
good old Brad.
More volume, right? Menno was saying as well, like up to 50 sets, tons and tons of volume. And I'm still not quite as low as this, because obviously Gear and they train on crack and crystal meth and really hard. But then there's the mental on the other side. And I'm like, we've these polarizing these debates, and it's going to be a depends argument. But now we're seeing all those people that talked about high volumes, their recommendations are just dropping by the year. So from this, as a guy I know has read all of this stuff, where's your take on training volume? And what is it depends?
It is, mate. It completely, and it's what a crappy answer. It completely depends, because again, you've got this spectrum of volume versus intensity. So there's so many, again, controllables. There's so many other factors that determine that question. So you've got a guy who's doing 50 sets, but none of them are going to failure, and you've got a guy who's doing 2 sets, but they're going to full failure, and again, they're extreme points of view. Which one's better, 50 sets of, junk volume or 2 sets of close to failure sets. Training volume is one aspect of so many things you need to look at. So many, and looking just at training volume is just a bit, again, trying not being able to see the forest through the trees. You're looking at one element of so many different factors. However, I would say to that is, who's the individual in front of you? Are they a sprinter that does 6 sets in a gym? All right, would we move them to 50 sets? No. Are they a person who has only 2 days a week to get to the gym, 1 hour? They can't get the frequency up, so frequency would take volume. Okay, so the amount of time that you can visit the gym or do a certain movement is going to dictate total volume. So frequency is your biggest thing. They have a reduced frequency. They only have 2 hours a week. Are we going to get them to do more volume in those sessions? Of course. Okay, we're just going to push the volume up. So who's the individual in front of you? What is their, where have they been with their training for the last 10 years? Have they been the Mark Menzer? Have they been the Dr. Marcus Rattel, Brad Schoenfeld? Then deciding where you go with the volume is really important. So again, there's just no definitive. For me, I'm like you, Simon. I watched your video. I'm the high intensity, low volume guy. Okay, I've tried the high volume stuff. I died. I literally died. My soul left my body. People did not recognize me. I was not a fun person to be around. I used to squat 4 times a week. It was not a vibe. It just depends. And again, I would always be in the middle ground. I'm not going to go high volume with anyone. I'm not going to go crazy volume. I'm not going to go really, really high intensity, low volume, unless there's a specific application to that individual, and you're going to find a middle ground with the volume, and again, that's exactly coming back to the point where, I said earlier, me going through the research and looking at training volumes and the results is for me. It's not for anything to do with anyone that I'm going to apply it to. Will it affect my coaching, my periodization, my application? It might affect it by like a 1%. Okay, there's a general consensus towards lower volumes, higher intensities, and are we really getting closer to failure? And are we, if we're doing 6 sets of an exercise, what's the quality of the exercise, the last set, and all of this stuff. An application of that, because that's what they're looking at now, aren't they? So they're looking at that sort of stuff. Absolutely. So, where I used to maybe do, 6 sets of 6 or 7 sets of 5 with an individual that really wants to push their, their strength up, I might just say, okay, what's the quality of the work at the end of that? Let's bring that down a bit. So it's tiny, tiny minutia movements, migrations from where I am now, rather than, oh, there's this new research, we thought high volume. When we went to high volume, I didn't take anyone to high volume because again, we were working with individuals like even my powerlifters, competitive powerlifters that, you know, some of them were world champions, some of them were like high level athletes. They didn't get paid for that. They still had a job that caused a hell of a lot of stress. They still had relationships they had to manage because they were in the gym for 3 hours. They still had all these aspects where if I said, right, volume dictates strength massively. I'm going to chuck shitloads of volume to this person because it will make them stronger. It's crazy. It's crazy. There's no practical application in that scenario, you know? And what is optimal means nothing for the people that we apply it to. Okay. Yes. What is optimal means nothing. Again, it's just for it adds to our library of information that we can make a better decision and find an outcome for that individual that we have in front of us. So unfortunately, really, really boring answer, mate. Really, really boring answer.
I didn't think that was a boring answer at all. I think you're bang on the money when it comes to some of the volume stuff. It's like when you look at, again, another thing to take research with a pinch of salt is that, like, who are the people coaching these people close to failure on these volume sets? Like we're talking about guys in lab coats, and you know from coach to coach, right? You looking at someone saying that's failure, and another coach going, "How many did you got in the tank?" Oh, none. And the reps were speedy, and you go, "Get back in there, motherfucker!" You know, I've seen Formula One race cars move slower than your last rep. You know, like. So again, are we really, what are they considering failure? What are the exercises that they're doing? Have we got set up in these exercises that they're testing that allows you to go closer to true failure? And then even if you don't have that, I always look at volume now very much like two triangles, like point on point against each other. When you look at a beginner, you're going to start higher volume, lower intensity. Why? Because you don't know how to generate intensity. So you want to give them a lot of practice. And your goal is to find the minimum effective dose. How can we get it to you to a 6 rep where your 6 rep is really slow and it takes 10 seconds to do, and you can get growth and progress from that? Cool. Then I'm going to do that for a while. What I call it a step loading for hypertrophy. What I mean by step loading, it's not step loading in terms of like the rep scheme that people use for strength. I mean like, okay, we'll do 2 hard sets now. We found the minimum effective dose. We'll keep doing that for as many weeks until you can't progress tonnage from that. And then first thing I'll look at is go, is it a stability issue? Okay, let's work on some lower traps on accessory work. Keep going. Okay, we've now stopped tonnage again. Is it a skill issue? Okay, we'll work on some form stuff. Keep going. Then we go, okay, is it another accessory issue? We'll work some triceps. Keep going. And then I'll go, right, there's no other reason here. So we've either got food or volume, right? Okay, I don't want to give them more food unnecessarily. Okay, I'll add a set. And I'll run the same process again. And then I'll add a set. And then what you'll find, and this is why I built this for Gen Pop, because if you look at the volume landmarks, for sake of the old Israel volume landmarks, it's somewhere like between 10 and 25 sets per week, right? I'll stop below that, right? Probably just below maintenance volume, what he would consider maintenance volume. And then I'll scale up. And what you'll find is the people who are trained more intensely would probably get to like 3, maybe 4 working sets on something and be like, they can't recover from it. I pull back 10%. We found their volume.
Yeah.
But then we get the Gen Pop person. You know that person that comes in the gym and they're thinking about the last meeting and they're thinking about the next meeting and they're not really paying attention. You try and get them to slow down, but they're still like in the gym and people that can't see it, they look like fucking Roadrunner. And they're like, they will get to 25 sets of chest. And the reason why I will happily push those volumes with people is because I don't feel comfortable giving you more load as a progressive stimulus rather than progressive overload, because I don't feel comfortable that you're safe doing that because you aren't paying attention. But I could add a set of the same stuff. And is it more junk volume? Sure. But you're not training closer to intensity for that to be a point factor anyway. So it means I can get a result, albeit not the optimal result I'd like, with you, even though you only got half your head in the game.
Yeah, I think, again, we're going back to what is optimal is not applicable. Okay, what is optimal and what the research says is not applicable. Are we moving the needle forwards with that individual, like you're saying? Are we adding an extra set? Is there a little bit about we're saying, all right, the quality of work isn't quite there, but how much work is it going to get me to the point where I can get them to do quality of work versus just add an extra set and we're going to get it. We are going to move the needle forwards. We're moving the needle forwards. We're not optimal. We don't need to be. We don't need to be optimal. And like I think people looking at research and going, but this is optimal. You know, how many times have you heard that on a reel like lately? You want the optimal position for the biggest bicep growth. Well, you know, the geezer's doing one bicep exercise a week and hoping his biceps grow. Like he can just, you know, add a little bit of a volume, regardless of what, you know, whether we call it high quality work or low quality work. It's going to get the needle moving forwards.
Yeah.
We don't need to be thinking about length and biases at this stage. We don't need to. And it's so hard for coaches that want to be evidence-based, that are going around that journey, to apply that. And I think that's the misrepresentation of when I say I'm an evidence-based coach. People think I'm going to get them in length and biases. No one does length and biases on my program. Yeah. There's a few people that have, you know, been with me maybe 5-6 years in terms of coaching, that I will bring in certain advanced techniques, and I will call these advanced techniques because they've maximized everything else and they could do with something. And do you know what? Sometimes playing about with a new exercise you haven't done really gets you to execute better for a while. You know, you've done a tricep push down for 6 years and like you've grown your triceps great and they've worked, but you've done them for 6 years. So your application now is just a bit, it's the effort's not there, you know, because you're just bored of them. All right. If I change to an overhead position, a little bit of a change in terms of structure and mechanics, will they just put a bit more effort in because it's something new? They probably will. Will I get a result from that? Great. I'm not going to, you know, put everyone into, because I'm an evidence-based guy and I've found, you know, certain research is biasing length and ranges for certain movements. I'm not going to move everyone to length and ranges. That's not what an evidence-based coach is, I think. And I think that's where people want an evidence-based guy to give them a definitive on volume. You know, like, what should I be doing, Acos? Should I be doing high volume, loads of sets, or should I just be lifting heavy and making sure every set's to failure? I'm like, you know, it's a really nonsensical question. I'll always go back to this scenario because people talk about volumes of hypertrophy. Now, I remember I was dating a young lady and she was a swimmer. So this is when you talk about volume and application. She used to swim for 6 hours a day, 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening. She was a competitive high-level swimmer. If I swam 2 lengths, that's too much volume for me.
Yes.
But you're right? Right, that's too much. I'm done. Like that, my maximum recoverable volume is 2 lengths. Okay, but her minimal effective dose is 6 hours a day because she's been doing it for so long, and the body's adapted to those volumes. Okay, volume you can think about in so many ways. So you've got an individual that's been doing high volume training for a very, very long time. Their minimal effective dose is way past your maximum recovery dose, you know. So it depends. Who's the individual in front of you? How have they been trained? What is their biases towards endurance training versus, you know, I'm a sprinter. I'm not a marathon runner. I want short, sharp. Everything I do is short, sharp. Like without being crude. Everything I do. So like putting, like someone saying,
"Well, you're not with this lady anymore because she was expecting 6 hours a day."
Exactly, 6 hours. So like when the biases in terms of the research was, Brad Schoenfield was firing out this evidence, and again I'm the super skeptical guy when it comes to evidence. I'm like, who's these kids doing these studies? Like it's trained individuals of 2 years experience. Right, it's kids from uni that have gone gym once a month for the last 3 years. Yes. You know, like it's not trained individuals that have got an experience in training. So you've got to understand all of that in terms of context when it comes to volume. Even if it was an amazing volume is the way, you know, hypertrophy is going to do it. You know, if you've got me in front of you, you'd be crazy to throw volume at me. Like you'd lose me. Like if someone's coaching me and they throw volume at me, bye-bye. I don't care what's optimal. It doesn't work for me, you know.
But that's the point.
Individual differences.
The swimming example is really interesting because you're bang on the money there. But also like the interesting about weight training is because what you're training for, that swimmer is training for, is to be efficient. And when they're efficient, they're going to be able to go longer. Now, with weight training, where this confusion lies is that we're actually like, depending on the goal, we're either training to be efficient or inefficient. So if you're training a strength athlete that wants to be like a power lifter, you can make a direct parallel to the swimmer analogy. So that person who's more experienced will be able to do more volume, right? Because they're more efficient at these movement patterns. But then the rules change when you train a bodybuilder, because try giving Dorian Yates 25 sets of chest. He would fall to bits because he gets so much intensity out of that one set. And when I say intensity in bodybuilding, I mean proximity to failure. When I say intensity in strength, it's percentage of 1 rep max, right? He's doing so much hard work in that set that he doesn't need to do many. So as you get more advanced, your volume recommendations for hypertrophy will go down, not up, at least to a point. And then eventually you'll have to taper it. But, this is where that thing comes in. I think before I go to my last closing questions, another thing I thought about when you were talking about the length and range stuff is that we're fixating too much on lengthened and not on the word bias. You kept saying length and bias, and everyone fixates on the word length and not the word bias. So if I want to, someone says, I want to grow my hamstrings, I may bias more RDL hingy type movements, but it doesn't mean I don't do leg curls. If we only focus on the word lengthen, we don't do the other. It's like, it's a bias. I will do some squatty type things, whether it's machine or free weight, for glutes, but it doesn't mean I also don't do incline hypers. So I've got 2 closing questions for you. The first one based off the topic we've had today, and is that if a coach is listening to this, because most of my audience is coaches, but even if someone that wants to learn more about their health and is kind of into the data like you and maybe wants to be more informed, so they hire you, wants to start learning research, what's like 1 to 2 bits of advice that you would give them to be able to read research better and not get caught in common pitfalls?
I mean, if you're really if you're just at the point where you can read an abstract and you can look at something and you really want to go further into that, you could literally just go into like a Stats for Dummies book or like Research for Dummies book, and it will just basically give you the definitions and the terms of what you're looking at in research. So it depends where they are in terms of their journey. I think you can learn a lot from books and just learn and understand what you're reading, so you can break down a paper. The next stage, you can do courses. There is some courses out there. I think there's a few. Examine.com, I think, maybe like do a little course on reading research, etc. Unfortunately, most people are going to hate my answer. You don't understand research until you do your own research.
Love that answer.
You just literally, I really don't think you do. And I thought I did, and this was my personal experience. So I did the BSc, and I thought I understood research because we looked at research, but we didn't really understand how to critique research. We didn't really understand the ins and outs, the nuances, the variables that go into a study. It's only when you start putting a study together yourself, you're trying to recruit individuals, you're trying to set up the lab, when you do all this stuff, you really, really understand what research means. And without going to a really, real big skeptical viewpoint, you can understand how so many things can be manipulated. And Andrew Huberman talked about this on one of his recent podcasts about the quality of the research, the labs, the stuff that people do in labs that you shouldn't do when you're studying, like remove data that doesn't reflect your bias. Because we talk about having a hypothesis. So when you're doing research, you have a viewpoint. You shouldn't be doing a bit of research where you don't know. You're not expecting an outcome. Okay, so you're like, I just want to test creatine, see what happens. No, you have to hypothesize. I hypothesize that creatine will increase cellular ATP, and then you do the study, and then you find out whether your hypothesis was correct. Okay, unfortunately, people aren't doing that. They're changing the data and they're changing the hypothesis to what the data's coming out.
Well,
So there's so many things.
One on that was obviously Acos Ashioti did with the low fat study.
Right.
The 50 countries, right? The 50 countries that correlated high fat intake led to increased obesity and heart disease. And that's what changed all our dietary recommendations when he's come back and changed his mind on that, and he also found correlation between watching televisions and heart disease. And and he got rid of a bunch of countries that didn't support his data to fit this narrative. And again, and then you also add in greed and fame and notoriety. Does a lot of things to people. If I want to do a study on a force plates cost a lot of money. So someone has to fund said study. So now you see one of two things happen. You see people will fund the study because they want a certain outcome. How many studies do you see have people in with vested interest funding them? And the scientists should say no, but they want the notoriety of the study. They want the study to be done. And if they say no, they can't fund the study anymore.
Yeah.
So now we have these sort of things, and you're banging the money. I think that's a very good answer. Like, I'll tell you two study stories from my university. One just because it's fucking funny, and I'll probably make you look at me differently. And the other one because it proves your point. So my dissertation was on the effects of creatine monohydrate on intermittent sports, because there's a lot on sprinting, there's a lot on powerlifting, but there's very little on things like football, rugby, things like this. Certainly at the time. So I got people on a Wingate bike, and they come and did a intermittent sprint test. One group took 5 grams of creatine a day, they took a placebo, and we came in and we did it again. That was the aim of the study. That was the point. But in that year when I was doing it, my uncle passed away, right? Really young, of alcoholism. And because that was a really, really hard time, and I asked for an extension on my dissertation. And because I had the extension, I mean, I was doing it through the Easter holidays, which means all the people that said yes to my study now weren't here. So I had to then talk to all the other people doing extensions of this, and like, I'll do your study if you do mine, sort of thing. Yeah. So we now had a sample size, which was not a huge sample size, but good enough. And it was cut in half overnight. So immediately, my research, regardless of the findings, was dropped in validity because of time, place, circumstances, right? Which kind of proves your point. The other side of that, which I thought I'd tell you, is that one of the studies I did as a favor was, and this is why it's not always glamorous to be a researcher, is the effects of a carbohydrate mouthwash on exercise to exhaustion in the heat. So
carbohydrate rinsing, mouth rinsing,
So I did, so in a humidity chamber, so you're like cycling in the Sahara Desert, low intensity cardio, and all I got to drink was a mouthwash every like 30 minutes, and then I had a blood glucose taken every 15 minutes. So I had holes in every finger by the end of it. And then I get there, I arrive in here, and someone just hands me this wire. And I'm like, what's that? And he was like, we need to measure core temperature. I went, and what the fuck do you want me to do with that? So I'm on a Wingate bike for about 2 hours, right? In an uncomfortable seat with a thermometer up my arse, getting injections every 15 minutes with only a mouthwash. I was like, this isn't a fair trade. You did one set of sprints and took some creatine. This is not fair.
Imagine the drop-off rate if you were just hiring like college students and stuff for that. Like they would sign up for the thing and then literally a drop-off rate.
They wouldn't do the second test, would they? Like there's no way they'd do it again, right? And and that actually massively proves your point. I will, because you said people wouldn't like that answer because they want a definitive, I will give one answer to my question that will be something where people can go to immediately. And that's understand p-values. I think p-values are a game-changing thing in research because you could read an abstract and go, this study says that there is a significant increase in X because of Y. And you go, put up my stories, I'm going to make a reel. And then you go, okay, let's look at the p-value. And it's 0.9 versus 0.0000009. So for people that don't understand, the p-value shows how statistically significant the finding was. And the more zeros after the decimal point, the more statistically significant the research is. So if we showed that X supplement improves someone's blood glucose reading, and p-value 0.5, we can safely assume that while it does, it's like we've spoken about the whole of this episode, it's probably not that important. It's cool, but not really that significant. If X supplement improves someone's blood glucose reading and it's 0.00000000009, you can go, oh, I'm going to pay attention to this shit. And that is such a small thing where you don't need to understand the language, the terminology, that can immediately make you look at research slightly better, even if you don't understand the full picture right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone knowing that it's a 0.05 p-value for it to be statistically significant, and understanding that would be a really good point. But I think with that is you'd have to go a little bit more in depth and look into statistical analysis. So get a statistical analysis book for dummies and understand how they analyze that to get a p-value. I mean, if you ever done SPSS work, on the system at uni, SPSS being the statistical analysis software that you use at uni. I remember that. Like the bane of my life, the absolute like part of uni that I could always just.
I blanked out that system until you brought it up again. It's been so long, so I've done anything like that.
Mate.
I was like, I don't know if I have, and then I went, oh my god, yes, I have. I hated it.
Yeah, SPSS was literally the bane of my existence, but it really, like, so glad that we took time to really understand statistical analysis, because then you can actually break down the stats that you're looking at. And that's some really in-depth stuff. Like, I mean, I guess you'd have to be a bit of a data geek like me to go, right, I really want to understand statistical analysis. I'm going to read a book about that. Everyone on the podcast thinking, what the hell? I'm not doing that. Like, do I really need to do that? But like you say, understand p-values, you're going to be, halfway there. And then, from there, it just, you'll get down a rabbit hole. If you like p-value stuff, you're going to get down a rabbit hole. And all the other stuff.
I like that. And I think it comes back to that point you said at the start of, midway through the show, of like, people much smarter than us have done the work to help us do this. So, I think if a coach, I think we've got this. The evidence-based crowd has come so forward in the mainstream, and hopefully this show has shared that we've shared that. Okay, what's the good bit about it, and why that's a fantastic thing, to make sure people are giving good, accurate, safe, and effective protocols to people, and where the flaws are, so you can find your own sort of like middle ground with things. But also, you don't have to be. So it's not saying that you don't have to be evidence-based, but you don't have to be a researcher to be a good
absolutely.
Sign up to mass. Sign up to journals where people tell you in English. Look at examiner.com where they look at it for you and go, I'm going to tell you in English what's relevant with omega-3s. Sign up to these things so people smarter than you can tell the answers. You don't need to go hunting for it yourself. You just need to collect this information, and your job is to take Menno's monthly journal and mass and take the information and go, right, I need to take it from that language, because they've taken it from science language to your language, and you need to take it from your language to client language. And you don't need to do the grunt work in the studies. If you like it, if you're a nerd like me and Acos, you go nuts. Like, we'll join you. But you don't. You can be an amazing coach without ever looking at any studies. Absolutely. You just need journals to tell you what it means.
I think when we talk about being evidence-based, I think it's, you don't need to be a geek. But if you're evidence-based, you can start putting a bit of critical thinking to the information that's coming out. I think it's the non-evidence-based guys or girls or whoever that are taking Menno's information and applying it and saying, but you don't need to do that. You just need to do that, because they're non-evidence-based, because they're just taking something for gospel, because they don't have the ability to analyze what's been coming out and go, right, use a little bit of critical thinking, use a bit of your understanding of the situations, the research prior, the experience that you've gone through, and then go, okay, this information's come out from Menno or Mass. Does it apply to anyone that I coach? The ones that aren't evidence-based are the ones going, yeah, everyone needs to do length and bias. Okay, they're not evidence-based, guys. This is the key thing to understand, because they're not understanding the evidence. They're just interpreting someone that you think someone's put a bit of information out, they're firing it out, and they're saying this is gospel. Evidence-based means I've got a bit of a critical thinking about this. I'm going to have a look at the study. I'm going to put that in with all my experience and my current understanding of research. And then I'm going to decide, does this affect my coaching with anyone? And am I going to apply it anywhere? That's being evidence-based. I think that's the understanding. You don't need to be evidence-based, meaning you don't need to be knowing all this stuff, but you can't then just put out an abstract because you found one or someone's put out a thing, and then that, I don't think that's being evidence-based.
You need to be a critical thinker.
I think that's blaming it. Yeah, critical thinking is the big term there.
And this is the thing, you hit the nail on the head. I've seen people that I wouldn't call evidence-based, where they go, research suggests on their reel, like you do.
Oh,
but
mate,
you
but I actually look at the research.
Yeah, you put studies up, right? I've seen people say that, and then they put a on screen Menno's social media post. I'm like, you haven't even gone off Instagram before you said.
Wow, yeah, because they can't access, because the amount of times, this is again when you know what they're doing. I can't access what stuff Menno's looking at because it's published ahead of print, and if you're not paying for the journal that it's printed on, you don't get access. All you can see is the abstract.
Yeah.
So when anyone's doing that, they're not evidence-based. And I've done it, but I've done it in a point where I've said, there's this evidence coming. Do we need to think about this? Not, yes, you must do this now because this study has showed this, like that. That's not how you roll it, evidence.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And sometimes I look at Menno's stuff and I'm just like, research suggests that you can deadlift more with straps than you can without straps. Well, fuck it.
Oh, flipping hell. Who didn't know that?
Yeah, I'm so glad we spent loads of money on researching that, right? I'm so glad that's where money is going, right? I just believe it. The last question, I think this is really apt for this conversation. It's the last question I always ask everybody. And I ask this because so many people see people on the podcast and they look at you with your 20 years experience of coaching and go, oh, I could never be that. And I think I'm very much live by the phrase, it's idiots all the way up. And when we realize we're all human, we realize that if I'm a new coach, I could become anybody that's interviewed on the show. So name one thing that you've changed your mind on. And I know that's an open-ended question. And whilst you think of it, it could be in research, it could be in training, it could be in nutrition, it could be in life. But what is one thing you've changed your mind
on? I think go straight to, if anyone knows me from a long time, when I first got into the evidence-based approach, it is this whole, just because a study says it doesn't mean it's gospel, because I was the individual that used to spend 600 quid a month on supplements because I felt like, and I did this, people will remember me, and I've got posts probably on my Instagram from when I first started, and I'm not ashamed to say it, like I would read a study or an abstract, find tiny significant value for CLA, and then I'd be on CLA for the foreseeable future, Yeah. So it is like, I think my one is, my learning curve to what the evidence suggests, and supplements being just that. It's like, if you don't have all the other variables. I'll talk about supplements quite a lot because unfortunately it's a subject that people want to talk about. People want to hear about, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I'll be stupid if I don't try and promote my business by talking about the subjects, talking about the weight loss drugs, talking about the miracle compounds, and looking at the evidence. But if anyone was to ask me, I would say you don't need supplements until you've got all the other barriers sorted. And then if there's deficiencies that most people have, like vitamin D3 deficiency, that is a very high probability, you can start on just basically the deficiencies, and then until you've got all the other stuff sorted, all the supplements don't matter. Again, even with creatine, if someone asks me about creatine, I'm like, how many times a week are you training? What's your recovery process? What's your intensity levels? All of that. All right, listen, forget creatine. Let's sort all of this out before we go to creatine. Unfortunately, the amount of times I get someone who coaches with me that the first thing they want to know is a supplement profile. And then they wait 3 months or 4 months or 5 months for it. And then they get the gist of, we're not going to supplements right now. Supplements are just that. So that's where I would say that's the biggest thing I've changed my mind on over the last sort of 2 years.
Yes, I'm still quite a pro supplement guy, but you bang on the money. It's like they are there to supplement just that. I've recently created a supplement guide for the guys in SMU, and I thought, oh, that's easy. I've used loads of stacks over the course of my 15-year career. Like, oh, I'll put some of them together in a document. Easy, it'll be a 10-minute job, no problem. Took me 6 weeks because you're there going, one, I can't use the blends because I don't want people having to try and translate, well, what is this and what's in this? I needed statistically significant dosages for everything, and not like, even if I have faith in something that's a little bit pushing the boat in terms of dosage, I'm giving this to somebody else, so I don't feel comfortable giving the dosage that I may feel comfortable using. But also, like, it's some of these things, like, people will go to that. I'll have people, even in the coaching world, that will go, my client can't sleep, should I use melatonin? Or what supplement should I use for that? And I'm like, are they going to bed on time? Are they removing screens? When's the last meal? You know, like, there's all these things, and I have to put a big disclaimer in the document of just like, while I'm a big fan of using supplements if the tool is there, they are not a replacement for the stuff that's most important. It's always the addition to. I think I'm very similar to you. My supplementation guidelines are like, what are people most likely to be deficient in? Better if they have blood work to tell me that's actually true. And we're looking at things like magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, maybe some D3, and maybe omegas. Outside of those, everything else is just a even when, and if you aren't sure, don't do it.
Yeah,
and that's literally that. So for people who want to learn more about you and listen to Chat Shit Tuesdays and all the other stuff that you put on your page, where are people finding you?
Yeah, I just focus on Instagram, so it's coach_Acos ACOS on Instagram. That's where most of my majority. We've obviously got my own podcast coming out with the man Dean Hammond, which is going to be interesting. It'll be a bit more like cutting through the bullshit, but I think there's Chat Shit Tuesdays are just debunking some of the shit that you watch and listen to online, and just trying to keep your head clear. And then all the other stuff is just actual usable evidence-based stuff. So
your Chat Shit Tuesdays and Ben Carpenter's Instagram are the only reaction videos I let slide. Actually, Ben Yanes, they're the only ones I let slide, because they are the only three that I think pass as non-bullying. And I think, okay, that's where the line is. So I think you do a very good job with those. So go and follow Acos. Absolutely well worth it. Mate, I've loved this. One of the best conversations I've had in a long time. And thank you very much for taking the time.
Ditto, mate. Ditto, thank you.